What's going on, everyone? I'm Steve from Burke Family 54 Comics, and in today's video, we're talking about the comic books to invest in the summer update of 2024. Before we do that, though, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and tell your friends, and consider joining the channel for just $1.99. In January, every single year, I put out a video of the best comic books that I think people should consider investing in as it relates to TV shows and movies. And I decided to do an update on that and look at the prices now compared to where they were 6 months ago. Newsflash, all the books for the most part are not doing so hot, obviously, as the comic book market has gone down a little bit. But there are a few books that have done well. Let's take a look here. Right at the beginning, we had the Echo TV show on Disney. We had Daredevil #9, the first appearance of Echo. In January, in a 9.8, that book was going for $190. It is now going between $100 to $160, down $30 to $90, depending on if you sold the book compared to where it's at now. Spider-Man #50, the first appearance of Kingpin, I decided to put that on the list as well. A CGC 6.0 was going for $1,000 in January. Now that book is right at $1,000 and as high as $1,160. So if you invested in this book, you're doing pretty well, because at worst you are breaking even and maybe even being up $160 if you decided to sell. So next up, we had the Madam Web movie, which for the most part, people did not like. It did not perform very well at the box office, did not get very good reviews. We have Secret Wars #6, the first appearance of Julia Carpenter. In a 9.8, that book was going for $130. Now it is going for $65 to $150, down as much as $65, but up as much as $25. These are values, again, just over the last couple weeks that I looked at. So you can either be down about half as much or be up about $20 to $25. Next up, we have Spider-Man #210, the first appearance of Madam Web. That book in a 9.8 was going for $685. It is still going for that much, so you are doing pretty well if you have that book. Next up, we have Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 2004, the first appearance of Anna Corazon. In a 9.8, that book was going for $110. Now that book is going for $65 to $100. So you're down as little as $10, but if you sold it at the lowest, you were down $45. Next up, we have Spider-Man #5 from 1999, the first appearance of Maddie Franklin. In a 9.8 back in January, that book was going for $100. Now it is going for $110 to as low as $32 in a 9.8. That's pretty low. So you could be up as much as $10, down as much as $68, depending on if you decided to sell at the highest or the lowest. And then the last book as it relates to Madam Web is Spider-Man #30 from 2001, the first appearance of Zeke. In a 9.8 back in January, that book was going for $120. Now it is going for $110, down all the way as low as $35. So you could be down as much as $10 all the way down to being down $85, depending on if you decided to sell it at different times. Next up, we have Deadpool versus Wolverine, Deadpool #3, coming out this month. Let's look at the first appearance of Deadpool and New Mutants '98. 9.8 of that book back in January was going for $1,200. Now it is going for $1,100, down to as low as $1,000. So if you decided to buy it back in January, you're down $100 to $200 in that book. But I still think that's a really good investment long term. Ryan Reynolds kills it with Deadpool. It's a fan favorite character. I think you're doing pretty well if you have that book. Next up, we have Hulk #181, a very, very expensive book. The first appearance of Wolverine, the first full appearance. We'll talk about the first appearance maybe another time in Hulk 180. But Hulk 181 in an 8.0 back in January, the first appearance of Wolverine was going for $5,300. Now it is going for as low as $4,350, but as high as $5,700. So if you decided to sell it at the lowest point, you are down $950. But if you decided to sell it at the highest, you are up $400. So that book has fluctuated, but it's a blue chip key. I would suggest if you have this book or if you bought this book, to hold on to it as long as possible. Wolverine #1 is another book I decided to put on this list for anyone that was looking to invest in some books. This is the next best thing if you cannot afford a Hulk 181. If you're like me, I have a Wolverine #1 and a 9.8 back in January. That book was going for $685. Now it is going between $560 to $590. If you decided to sell it, the lowest and highest, you could be down somewhere between $95 and $125 negative. And then last book up is the first appearance of Elektra. There was a rumor that she was going to be in the movie. I think she's still going to be in it. Her first appearance is in Daredevil #168. A CGC 9.6 of that book back in January was going for $800. Now it's going for $500 to $750. So down as much as $300, down as little as $50, depending on if you decided to sell it. Next up, we have the Kraven movie. There are 4 books to talk about here. We have Spider-Man #15, the first appearance of Kraven. And a 7.0 back in January, that book was going for $2,000. Now it is going for $1,660 to $1,680. So you're down between $320 to $340 if you decided to sell it. Next up, we have Spider-Man #1, the first appearance of Chameleon. Back in January, a CGC 5.0 was selling for $13,500. Now that book is selling for $11,400 to $11,500. So you're down around $2,000 if you decided to sell this book. But this is another huge blue chip key. I think most would agree this is a book you'd want to hold on to long term. Next up, we have Spider-Man #41, the first appearance of Rhino. And an 8.5, that book back in January was going for $2,000. Now it is going for $2,000 to $2,080. So it is even and up as much as $80. Another really good blue chip key to consider having long term if you can afford it. And then the last book up is Spider-Man 209, the first appearance of Calypso. Back in January, 9.8 was going for $190. Now it is going for $145 up to $360. I feel like that $360 sale might be something fishy going on with that. So I feel like the $145 is probably the true value of that book. So you'd be down probably around $50 if you decided to sell that book. Okay, we have the Venom 3 movie coming out later this year. We really only have one book to talk about, but there are 2 different things to talk about with that book. We have Spider-Man #300, a first appearance of Venom, obviously. A 9.8 direct of that book back in January was going for $3,000. Back in January, a newsstand 9.8 was going for $9,600. Let's take a look at the values for it now. There are no sales data for the newsstands, but the direct, we have 2 different values here. We have 2,600 up as high as 3,150. So you could be down as much as $400 or up as much as 150, but that's another, like, it's not like a huge like blue chip key, but like it's definitely a key that anyone wants to keep in their collection, especially if you have it in a 9.8. So you do what you want with that. My opinion would be if I had a 9.8, I want to hold on to it for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it is. Okay, next up we have the X-Men 97 animated show that came on Disney Plus earlier this year. Great show. If you've never watched it, make sure you guys do yourself a favor and watch it. I'm not a big Marvel or X-Men fan, and I even enjoyed the show. Let's talk about, I think there are 4 different books to talk about. We have X-Men #1, the first appearance of the original X-Men. In a CGC 5.0, that book was going for $13,800. Now the fair market value of that book is $14,125, but the last sale was $13,200. So you could be up a couple $100 or down $600. This is a major blue chip key. Again, if you have this book, you're probably not really looking to sell it. Next up, we have GSX #1, the first appearance of the new X-Men and the second appearance of Wolverine. Back in January, a CGC 9.4 near mint copy was going for $8,090. Now that book has gone down quite a bit. It is now worth $5,900, which is a negative of $2,190. I still feel like this is a pretty big book to keep in your collection. If you bought this book, I think if I was looking at that, I'd be pretty upset that it went down. But overall, this is a book that, like, it's going to do this, but overall it will end up going up in value, in my opinion. And then we have Avengers Annual #10, the first appearance of Rogue and Madeline Pryor. 9.8s of that book back in January were going for $630. Now it is going for $455, up as high as $1,323. That high sale feels very fishy as well. So my opinion is, let's take a look at the lowest value, and you'd be negative $175. This is a good key to have, especially if you were an X-Men fan. And then lastly, we have X-Men #1 from 1991. 9.8 of that book back in January was going for $100. Now it is going for $70 to $110. So basically even, maybe up $10, minus 30, depending on if you decided to sell it. Okay, next up we have Agatha All Along, which has changed its name all along. We have a couple different books to look at as it relates to this TV show. We have FF #94, the first appearance of Agatha. In a 9.0 back in January, that book was going for $610. Now it is going for $365, which is a negative of almost $250. Yikes. And the show hasn't even come out yet, so that's not good. And then we have Young Avengers #1, which, before I talk about it, I'm actually surprised when looking at the value compared to January versus now, considering that they've all but confirmed for the most part that the new Young Avengers, like, coming together to become a Young Avengers team is really not going to happen. A 9.8 back in January, that book was going for $280. Now it is going for $275, and again in a 9.8, which is down only $5, which is surprising, honestly. Okay, I want to run through these next 5 pretty quickly because they've all been about the same. We have the Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 through 3. We've only got the first 2 parts that have come out on movies that you can buy. And I talked about Crisis on Infinite Earths #1, the first appearance of Blue Beetle in DC continuity. Crisis on Infinite Earths #6, first Anti-Monitor. #7 is the death of Supergirl. #8 is the death of Barry Allen. And then #12 is the first appearance of Wally West as Flash. Those are probably the biggest keys out of the entire run, or the miniseries. All of those in 9.8s were going for around $100, and they're still going for right around $100, maybe even as high as $120. Those books have really stayed the same because they're not super expensive books, but it is definitely an iconic DC story that everyone, if you're a DC fan, tends to like, which I'm a huge DC fan. Speaking of DC, let's talk about Joker 2. I don't even know the name of it. Like, I don't even know how to say it. But we have 2 different books I want to talk about as it relates to the movie. We have The Killing Joke, the iconic Joker story where the Joker cripples Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon's daughter. In a 9.8, that book back in January was going for $300. It is now going for $200 to $250, so down down as much as $100, or down as little as $50. I feel like this book maybe is not the best, like, long term in terms of like the value of it, but it's just an amazing story. If you're a DC fan or a Batman fan, if you've never read this, do yourself a favor and read it. It is one of the best single issue stories I've ever read. And then let's talk about Batman Adventures 12, the first appearance of Harley Quinn. Back in January, a 9.8 of that book was going for $2,500. It is now going for $1,775 to as high as $2,150. So it is down about $700 to $350, depending on if you decided to sell it at the lowest or the highest recently. But I feel like this is another book that people should hold on to for a long time, because it feels like Harley Quinn is like very popular among like new readers and young readers and any females that are reading as well. We have a couple different more shows, and actually it's just all shows. We have 4 different shows to talk about. We have the Penguin series that is coming to HBO, and then after that, I assume it's going to be coming to Max. We have Batman 155, the first Silver Age appearance of the Penguin, and a CGC 6.0. That book back in January was going for $675. It is now going for $811, or as high as $1,000. This is a book that I have in my collection that I'm surprised to see that it's actually gone up this much. Like DC books, it feels like this is a pretty good time to get some DC books because it feels like they're going up in value. So that's pretty exciting to see. Then we have Batman number 405, the first appearance of Carmine Falcone. Back in January, a 9.8 of that book was going for $180. It is now going for $165 in a direct, and as high as $384 in a newsstand 9.8. So if you decided to buy it back in January, I feel like overall you're doing pretty good on this book. And then lastly, as it relates to the Penguin show, we have Batman The Long Halloween number 1, the first appearance of Alberto Falcone, and a 9.8 back in January. That book was going for $185. It is now going for $150 to $210. So if you decided to sell it, you could be up $25 or down $35. Next up, we have the Watchmen animated like movies, I think is what it is. We finally got our first trailer for chapter 1 recently. Watchmen number 1 is the only book that I want to talk about as it relates to that Watchmen movies, show, whatever you want to call it. 9.8s back in January were $600. It is now $610 to $750. It's gone up as low as $10, but has gone up as high as $150 if you decided to buy it back in January and sell it now. Okay, then we have 2 different indie shows that I want to talk about that are actually pretty popular. We have Invincible. I think season 2 just came out. It was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. Invincible number 1 is the only book I want to talk about, the first appearance of Invincible. And a 9.8 back in January, that book was going for $4,200. It is now going for $2,500, up as high as $4,200, which would be even. So if you decided to sell it at the highest, you would have broke even, not made any money. If you decided to sell it at the lowest, you would have lost $1,700. That is not good. That is not good at all. But I feel like Invincible could be a good book to hold on to long term. But, you know, the show's not going to last forever, so who knows. And then lastly, we have The Boys, which we are in season 4 right now. I think episode 7 just came out. 2 different books I want to talk about as it relates to the show. We have The Boys number 1, the first appearance of The Boys, or a few of them. We have in a 9.8 back in January. That book was going for $430. It now has an FMV of 384 with the last sale of 360. So you could be down $45 to $70 depending on if you decided to sell it. Then we have The Boys number 3, the first appearance of Homelander, and a 9.8. That book in January was going for $160. It is now going for $250. With the last sale being $220. So that's a book that has gone up in value as high as $90 and as low as $60 if you decided to sell it. So those are the books that I want to talk about and update you guys on. If you decided to invest in any of those, that's how much they're worth now versus how much they're worth in January. Again, I'm Steve from Burke Family 54 Comics. Let me know in the comments section what you guys think about today's video. Do you have any of these? All of that and more. All right, guys, thanks for watching. And as always, go Cats!
Cowabunga! Scorpion time!
Today's video is brought to you by comicbook_pressing on Instagram. Protect your comic book investment for as little as $12 by using Eric from comicbook_pressing on Instagram. He can press any grade or tier of book, and make sure you use my promo code BURKE54 to get free shipping back to you on your first order. Again, today's video is brought to you by comicbook_pressing on Instagram.